Well, good evening. My name is Dick Rivers. I'm the Executive Director of the Cornell Cooperative Extension in Cattaraugus County. We're located in Ellicottville, New York. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone here this evening and participate in the Western New York Virtual Energy Tour. At this time, I'm going to introduce Natalie Rodriguez, and she will introduce our other panelists.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Natalie Rodriguez. I am the program manager for Push Green. I am excited for tonight. I just wanted, before I go on to introduce the rest of the team, I do want to just say welcome to any new participants and to Senator Kennedy's constituents if they're tuning in and watching the recording. And I just wanted to give a little background because we're in the fourth workshop of 5 of a collective hosting with Cornell Cooperative to bring attention to energy efficiency and renewable energy programs available across Western New York. And all of our previous recordings are on our websites if anyone is interested to watch those. They have more information on more programming. And then I also wanted to just highlight just a initiative that we've been working on that we just started on Earth Day with Senator Kennedy's office, which is called Let's Bring It Home. And it's just really highlighting just and trying to bring awareness to the recent passing of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA, and trying to help the communities connect with energy efficiency programs and ways for you to take the next step in making your home more comfortable, healthier, and more affordable. And I'm excited for tonight because Sarah Berger, our colleague, will be talking more about programs and renewable energy technologies that really align with this initiative and with the CLCPA. So I'm really excited for tonight. And if Lou and Jay, they're part of the Push team as well, if you guys want to just introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lou DeJesus, a community energy advisor with Push Green, and we are in for a treat.
Thanks, Lou. My name is Jason Posner. I am a community energy advisor as well with Lou. I've been with Push about 4 years now, covering 5 counties for what we do. We advocate as well, and I'm really excited to hear what Sarah has to bring tonight. I know it's really good stuff. Thank you.
And Sarah, if you want to just introduce yourself and then you could shoot away.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Berger. I'm the Sustainability Planning Manager at Push, and I also lead our Push for Clean Heat campaign. All right.
Maybe I can jump in here for a moment just to let everyone know in our audience that this is a live presentation and it is being recorded. It'll be available to you later if you so desire. You can also change your name or mute yourself so as not to interrupt our presentation. And if you have any comments or questions, which we will address later, please put them in the chat box. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I just want to give a little background about what the Push for Clean Heat campaign is. Push for Clean Heat is part of a network of clean heat campaigns across the state. So if you're not close to Erie County, there's probably one near you, but we can also always help you out. And what we are is we're a campaign where we want to really educate people about what heat pumps are. Excuse me. And then we also want to help connect them to incentives and resources and installers that can help them get a heat pump in their home if they're interested. The other thing that we're looking at, and it's still a learning process because heat pumps are relatively new on a large scale is that we want to figure out how we can connect folks with good paying jobs in heat pump installation.
Also want to help connect them to incentives and
Because as more people need heat pumps, we're going to need more installers to help with keep up with the demand and the maintenance. And then the other thing we want to do is we're trying to learn about how we can address specific issues for LMI households that they might face when they're transitioning away from their heat systems, away from fossil fuels. And then the last thing I just wanted to do is give a little bit of context about myself, because sometimes when I've talked with people about heat pumps, they might feel a lot of pressure to like turn around and get one installed, and then it's a process. And so I have a really old house. It's pretty uninsulated, and I have a gas boiler in my basement. And so though I intend to get a heat pump in the future, I know that I need to get my house insulated well first. I need to get it air sealed. And so I know that there's a bunch of steps that might happen before. So it's all about the journey and just kind of taking those steps one at a time. So some of the benefits of the heat pumps. So for most systems, you can get heating and cooling in one system. And the only reason I say most is because if you have hydronic heat, so that might be heat that uses hot water passed through a baseboard or a radiator, that doesn't really work for cooling unless you add another type of unit, which I'll talk about in a minute. So I just like to give that little caveat, but it is a great way to get cooling in your home. And as we get these more intense summers, that's going to become more valuable. There's also savings for people who have electric baseboard, oil, and propane, and if you have conventional air conditioning. So that's not to say that people with natural gas will never save money, but there are a couple of nuances that I'll go into later. So it's not necessarily a guarantee with every system. There's a lot of things it depends on. And then, you know, as we're eliminating fossil fuels from our home and our neighborhood, we're getting cleaner air. So if you have an older gas system like I do in my basement, if it's not pumping out a lot of heat and that's getting drafted out, I can actually smell a little bit of gas in my basement. And whenever you're smelling that, that means you're breathing it in. The other thing I think about is whenever I turn on my gas stove and I get that whiff of air. So as we're taking gas out of our homes, we're making them healthier inside and out. And then the final goal of this is to be able to power our homes completely with renewables. So we know that we need to get off of fossil fuels and we need to start transitioning to renewables, but you can't use solar power to power a gas-fired heater. You have to make it electric before you can use solar power, and that's solar on your roof or maybe off-site solar or wind or other renewables. So there's a couple of types of heat pumps. I'm really going to go into the two most popular ones in our area. There are a couple more, but we don't need to get into those right now. So there are two main types of heat pumps. There's air source heat pumps, which look kind of similar to if you have a central AC unit. There's a condenser outside. Sometimes they look a little flatter like this one. And they can either hook up into your existing ductwork, or if you don't have ductwork, you can install what are called mini splits, which are they're wall, floor, or ceiling mounted units that will provide the warm air or cold air, depending on the season, in your home. So especially if you have an older home that doesn't have ductwork, you don't necessarily need that for a heat pump. And then there's ground source heat pumps. And the way that these work is that instead of using the heat energy from the air to convert or to transfer into your home, and I'll go into that more later, it actually, you dig a loop in the ground and then it uses the base ground temperature. So that's roughly 40 degrees year round. It varies slightly depending on exactly where you live. But basically what the ground source heat pump does is it uses that base earth temperature to increase the temperature from there. So if you're cooling, we're not going to increase it as much as if you're heating. And these in-ground systems can either take up a large space in your yard, or they can have vertical wells, which take up much less space. And there are at least 13,000 systems across New York, and those are just the systems that have claimed incentives. So there's probably more out there. And then I just want to show pictures of what heat pumps exactly look like instead of just graphics. So over here, here's an example of one of those mini split heads that's wall mounted. And then here's a ceiling mounted mini split head, although they didn't finish their drywall patching yet. So there's a lot of flexibility with how you can get these systems in your home. And then they also make ones that are floor mounted that look similar to this, but might be in the same spot as a radiator. And then these are the outdoor units. So they look similar to an AC where there's a fan in there, and then there's a refrigerant line that connects to the indoor unit. So for ground source heat pumps, this is what the system looks like on the inside. Not everyone's super interested in your heating system, but I always like showing pictures. And one of the interesting things about ground source heat pumps is in the same system, they can connect a hot water tank, so they can also provide your hot water. And then here's a picture of the wells being dug. So this is a rig that's drilling the vertical well, which is great if you're in a really dense neighborhood, or maybe you don't have a lot of yard space. And then in areas that you might have more space, they'll lay a loop field is what they like to call it. And the installer will kind of figure out what works best for you and your home and your needs. But as vertical wells have become more popular and installers have done them more, the cost has come down a little bit. So heat pump technology isn't really new. We actually, most of us probably have a version of heat pump technology in our home. The most likely one's a refrigerator. And basically, heat pumps use refrigerant to transfer heat from one space to another. So with your refrigerator, they're transferring heat from inside the refrigerator to outside to keep that cold temperature on the inside. And then standard air conditioning actually works the same way as a heat pump does as well, with the refrigerant transferring the heat. It is much less efficient than a heat pump. And then the other thing is a heat pump has the ability to reverse the cycle. So a standard air conditioner only can provide cooling because it can only work in one direction. So I'm just going to really go over generally how these work. I'm not going to go too far into the weeds, but one of the main components of heat pumps is the refrigerant, because I get asked a lot, like people kind of know like how gas can help produce heat in their home, or maybe heating oil or propane, but how do we get heat from cold air? So there's always there's always heat energy in the air, right? Unless we're at absolute zero, which is negative 459 degrees, when there's no heat energy in the air, there's always some. And though we get cold in New York, we usually don't get cold enough to near the point where the heat pumps can't work. So refrigerants are a substance that can boil at really low temperatures. And that enables them to kind of take the heat that's in the air, even when it's like 20 degrees outside, and transfer it into your home. So these are just some examples of refrigerants. And if you look, the boiling points for these are at negative temperatures. The exact refrigerant that's going to be in your system depends on the exact system. And as we're getting better and better with the technology, there's actually some systems that will use a greenhouse gas free refrigerant, which is really exciting. So basically, an air source heat pump, you have the compressor and a fan, and the compressor is kind of like a heart, and it kind of keeps the refrigerant circulating because it has the ability to change the pressure of the refrigerant, which allows that refrigerant to trap heat and then also to release it. And the fan will either, depending on if you're cooling or you're heating, the fan will help remove the heat from the condenser if you need it, or inside, it'll actually blow the heat into your home. And then in the summer, that cycle's reversed to provide cooling. So I always like to talk about maintenance of systems because that's what keeps them running for a long time. And it's an important thing to talk about. So you have to, for both systems, you have to change your filter regularly. And I hope if anyone has any type of forced air system, even if it's gas, that they're changing that filter on a regular basis, because changing the filter helps make the lifespan of the system last longer. And then it's also, you're cleaning out the air that you're circulating through your home. And the amount you should change at your filter depends on your system, and then also depends on your home. So if you have a lot of pets, you got to change it more. If that return is closer to the floor, you want to change it more because it picks up more dust. So just check out where your filter is, take a look at it. If it looks gross, change it, and then make that your regular habit. The other thing for air source heat pumps is you need to have the system checked by a professional once a year. And this is a similar thing that you should be doing with your gas heating systems as well. They just check to make sure there's no parts that need replaced. And then it also helps prevent emergency calls for when your heating system goes down and you really need that heat or cooling. For ground source heat pumps, so the installer that we have partnered with our campaign, and each installer is a little different, they actually don't recommend maintenance except for changing your filter. What they do is they install a monitoring system. So if there's a small part that needs replaced, it just beeps on their system and they'll come out and switch that part out. He did tell me that 80% of the time when the system goes off, its filter is needing changed. So ground source heat pumps require much less maintenance because they have much less moving parts. So as I mentioned earlier, when I'm thinking about getting a heat pump in my home, I'm going to get it insulated before I get a heat pump. There's a couple of reasons why. The first is, especially in older homes, we all have really drafty spots. We have rooms that we have to wear sweaters in, maybe rooms we don't go in as much in the winter. And it's really important to try to address those areas with insulation and air sealing so that your heating system isn't working extra hard to heat areas that are poorly insulated. So if you think about the refrigerator again, your refrigerator isn't just a really thin box. Those walls are really well insulated. And then the gasket around the door seals that box shut. And when that gasket starts to fail, your refrigerator works extra hard. And it could possibly make your compressor die because it's working so hard. So it's really important that you are able to insulate and air seal your home. And it is not super easy, like especially if you have the walls up, it's a lot more expensive and it takes some time. I didn't catch the other workshops on this tour, but I'm sure that you guys probably have heard about the free energy audits, which is a great way to learn about the insulation that's in your home, if there's major areas that need air sealing, and it gives you an idea of where your home is energy-wise. And then there's the Comfort Home Pilot, which has no income restrictions, and it gives a small amount of money to getting specific work done. So you have to start with the attic, and then if you've gotten the attic done, you can get the walls done, and they give a set amount of money for each type of thing. And then there's Empower and Assisted Home Performance, and both are income qualified for renters and homeowners and provide much more financial assistance than the Comfort Home Pilot. And if you don't know where to start, reach out to Push Green. They can walk you through it. They know these programs, they are pros. So maybe you're not ready to change your heating system, right? Like maybe you just got a heating system a couple years ago and it still has some life left in it. Maybe you want to kind of save up some money to be able to change out your heating system, but you want to test heat pump technology. A great way to do that is with a heat pump water heater. Heat pump water heaters, they're an electrically fueled water heater. They're 2 to 3 times more efficient than just a regular electric water heater. And as we're electrifying more things in our home, it's really important that we try to get the most energy efficient option that we can get, because we want to reduce the amount of energy we're using overall, and we want to keep those utility bills as low as possible. With the heat pump water heater, this is the only heat pump technology that you can install yourself, or maybe have a family member install and still get the incentive. So I like to bring that up because the incentive's pretty good, and I'll get to those in a second. The one thing that I like being clear about is that it needs to be installed in a space that stays relatively warm. So, I mean, we can't put our water heaters outside anywhere, but it's a really great option if you have maybe a basement or a utility room that you don't use as a main living space. And the reason why is because they do add a little bit of cool air into the space they're in. Because remember how I talked about how it uses heat energy from the air? Well, it uses that heat energy in the air. So if you're someone who maybe has your water heater in your kitchen, and your kitchen is like perfectly comfortable when your heat's running, you might not want to put the heat pump water heater there, because it might make that space a little cooler. All right, so let's talk about money. I hate talking about it, but we all have to do it because that's how things get done. So this is a chart about operating costs, and we don't necessarily need to get too far into specifics, because this is a general chart and each home is different, and the amount of money that you save and your operating costs depend on the age of your system, how well it's maintained, and its actual efficiencies. But so this yellow line is propane, and propane's pretty expensive right now. I looked at the heating fuel dashboard right before I signed in, and it's actually a little higher than this. And this blue line is a typical cold climate air source heat pump. And so what this chart is showing us is at most temperatures, you're going to save money if you're using propane. And then heating oil, depending on the price, at the majority of our temperatures in the winter, because though it's cold, most of our temperatures were around 15 to 20 degrees, and between that and 45 degrees. So most of the year, it will be cheaper to operate. On the coldest days of the year, it will be a little more expensive, but since most of our winter days are these middle range temperatures, it should balance out. And then one of the things that I forgot to mention is that right now, there are cold climate air source heat pumps. They're heat pumps that are made for our climate. If you knew someone who installed a heat pump like 30 years ago, they didn't have cold climate heat pumps. And so they weren't specially designed for the climate, and they didn't go very cold. But now heat pumps are rated, cold climate heat pumps are rated for functionality at 5 degrees, and then also at negative degrees as well. How far they get into the negatives depends on your specific system, but a heat pump installer will look at the weather in your area and the average days and then the negative days and design a system that will work year round. And then this bottom line is natural gas. Natural gas is insanely cheap right now. It's probably not going to stay that cheap, but we also can't predict the future. So depending on your natural gas system, it might be harder to guarantee savings. If you have a very old gas system, that might not be the case. And then heat pumps, like all heating systems, range in efficiencies. So if you're replacing a really inefficient gas system with a really efficient heat pump, you might see some savings. Additionally, if you're installing cooling or you already have cooling, there might be some savings in the summer that you can account for. And then if you have electric heat, because heat pumps are at least 2 times more efficient than electric heat and you're not switching fuel sources, you will definitely save money. As long as your system is installed well and maintained well. I should always caveat that one. Electric strip heating is like heating your house with a toaster. So it's really inefficient, and heat pumps are roughly 2 to 3 times more efficient. So if you have electric strip baseboard heating, this is a great option. And then we'll talk about the cost of installation. So first of all, the cost of installing systems varies a lot with the size of your home, the insulation in there, as well as the exact system you get. And that's something that I always like to touch on because the ranges can be pretty big. Because especially with gas systems, they're much cheaper to run, there wasn't as much thought put into like making sure that we only use as much heat as we need. So there wasn't as much emphasis on like making sure your home is well insulated, which a good heat pump installer should always check and should always recommend. So the ground source heat pump upfront is much more expensive. The cost is roughly $20,000 to $30,000 because you're digging that in-ground system and you have to pay for the driller to come out, and then they have to dig the holes, and then they have to bury it all. So it's a pretty big cost upfront. The lifespan for the in-ground system, 50 to 100 years, possibly longer. So you're not going to have to redo that well as long as you have a good installer. The in-house system, 15 to 25 years, although the replacement cost for that is much, much smaller than the installation cost because you're only replacing that unit in the basement. So there are financial resources. The incentives, which I have on the next slide, those come from our utilities. All the incentives for the utilities across New York State are the same. There's federal tax credits. So if you have the ability to take those tax credits, check in with a tax professional about your specific situation or someone who is familiar with taxes about the exact amount, but there are pretty good tax credits for ground source heat pumps. And then I do have, for a limited time, the LMI heat pump demonstration study. That pot of money is almost gone, and the state is going to come out with a new program. So depending on how long it takes to put you through the system, you might not get in before the pot of money is gone, but keep an eye out because New York State is going to revamp some of its programs and include heat pumps in there. For the air source heat pump, the installation cost is a lot lower, $3,000 to $7,000 and up. And I put and up because if you have a very large home, you might have to basically install 2 systems. The lifespan, 15 to 25 years, similar to a furnace, but keep in mind it also provides cooling with 1 system, so you kind of want to keep that cost comparison in mind. And there's also incentives from the utility for this one as well. So let's talk about the incentives. On this chart right here, and I do have National Grid and NYSEG, that's just the territory that I commonly work in, but again, they're the same across the board. So there's this abbreviation CCASHP, that's just a cold climate air source heat pump. And where it says partial load is if you were to install a heat pump maybe in an area of your house that didn't get heating or cooling, but it didn't heat the whole house, that's what partial load means. So you can get $500 just off the system for that. Now, if you get a full load heating system, the incentive is much higher. So it's $1,000 per 10,000 BTUH. 10,000 BTUH is a way that they kind of size systems. And again, that size depends on not only the square footage of your home and how high your ceilings are, but also how well insulated your home is. Because if you put a heat pump in a really uninsulated home, you're going to need a bigger system because it's going to have to work harder to pump that heat out. So it's always better to insulate before, because then you're also not paying for additional equipment to be installed that you don't need. And then I'd like to just touch on what this NEEP 5 degrees means. So NEEP is an organization that has been doing so much research on cold climate heat pumps. They created additional testing for lower temperatures, and so they've identified systems that are successful in cold climates. They also have installation guidelines as well. So they're a really great organization, and the state recognizes that. So they want you to make sure you use a system that's on NEEP's list for air source heat pumps. For ground source heat pumps, the incentive is a little higher. It's $1,500 per 10,000 BTUH. And that's partially just because the system, excuse me, is more expensive to install up front. But you do also have the option of tax credits. And then the last one that I wanted to point out is the heat pump water heater. The heat pump water heater is $700 a unit, which is a great incentive. It brings the cost of the equipment much closer to an efficient electric heater or electric water heater. So though it's not the exact same, it's much closer, and then you save in the long term because the operating costs are so much lower. And then I always hesitate to talk about financing, but I do just want to mention it. There are two different finance options through the state. The first is an on-bill loan, where the loan amount appears on your utility bill and you pay it back that way. And then the second is the smart energy loan, and they each have differences and nuances. And if you decide to go with those, the loan providers will walk you through that. They're the professionals. But the one key thing I like to point out is if you do get a smart, so if you get an on-bill loan, those loans, whatever is left, is transferred if you sell your house. So that's something that's important to think about if you're not going to stay in your house for a long time. Smart energy loans are the borrower's responsibility. So if I take out the loan and I sell my house in 5 years, I still am responsible for that loan. All right, so next steps. If you want to talk more about your house and its specific needs and in relation to a heat pump, you can email info@pushforcleanheat.org. You can also check out our Facebook page and message me that way. If you think you're ready for a quote, I can connect you with one of our installers. We interviewed them and we vetted them as much as we could. If you want to learn more about Empower, assisted home performance, energy audits, anything energy efficiency, reach out to Push Green. You can visit their website, check out their Facebook page, or give them a call. And then if you want to learn more about heat pumps, we'll be doing 2 heat pump specific webinars. So a deep dive into ground source heat pumps, June 9th at 6 p.m. and a deep dive into air source heat pumps, June 23rd at 6 p.m. And we'll be having the installers with us for that. So you can check out our Facebook or our website for details on how to join. And that is it.
Thank you, Sarah. We do have a few questions. So I had one question about you said that with the ground source heat pump, you could connect your water heater to it. Now, if it's an existing one there, could you connect that one, or do you have to get a new one?
So you would get a new one. It's actually like basically a hot water storage tank.
Oh.
So it uses the heat transfer from the ground source heat pump to heat up your water and then store it. And the other thing I didn't mention is if you do have hydronic heating, ground source is a great option for that because it can get the water up to the temperature you need for hydronic heating. An air source heat pump, there's technology coming out, and I actually heard there's 2 good systems coming out this year, but it's still relatively new.
Sarah, I had a comment to make. It seems like when I've asked other professionals about heat pumps in this area, they've all said, well, they're fine, but it's for the milder climates. They're really not good here. I was pleased to hear you say that they are designing new ones now that were more appropriate for this area. You want to explain on that or say anything on that?
Sure. So heat pumps are cold climate heat pumps. They're not super new, but they're relatively new. So that's always something that gives installers a little bit of trepidation, especially when they have systems that they are so well versed on that they've installed for 40 years. It's really important to recognize that expertise and that air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps are relatively new compared to those systems. However, because we figured out two major things. First of all, we figured out how to make sure we design systems and test systems to work in cold climates. So they will test them to work at negative temperatures. And then the other thing that installers will do is they'll put what's called emergency heat on, which is basically an auxiliary heat for the very coldest days of the year, just in case the heat pump can't handle that load. So there is that backup. The other thing is we've learned a lot about installation and how to do a good install. So 2 really small things are that exterior condenser, it's really important to put it on the least windy side of the house. That wasn't really known for a while, and it took a lot of difficult installations to kind of teach us that. And then we also learned a lot about how we need to make sure we run that refrigerant line and plan it. So there are things that as more installers have been working on this technology, they've given feedback to the system designers, and they've given feedback to the system manufacturers. And so we've really gotten a lot further in cold climate heat pumps. Ground source heating's been around for a lot longer. And so there may be installers that are much more comfortable with that. But heat pumps are used a lot in like Canada, which gets very cold, as well as some colder European countries as well. So they're newer to the US, but they're used outside of the country in very cold climates as well.
Very good. You mentioned on the ground source, the vertical commitment there to install. How deep do they go?
Ooh, that varies. It varies by the type of like bedrock and what's under the ground. They go pretty deep. I'm gonna say, actually, I'm not gonna give a number because it just varies so much and it depends on the installer and the climate.
Yeah.
But it's not a hole you want to fall down, that's for sure. And they do, when they dig that vertical well, they do what's called grouting. So after they run that loop in, they add, it's not really grout. It's not like the grout in between your tiles, but it's just what they call it. They add that grout in there to make sure that that well is tight and that it's not going to sink or anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think there's one just about the incentives. Can you combine tax credits and incentives?
Yep. So you can get the incentives, and the way that the incentives work, I should have mentioned, is that you don't actually like wait, with the exception of if you install the heat pump water heater yourself, but you don't actually like wait for a check in the mail. The way that they work is that the installer takes off the cost of the incentives, and you should see that line item in your quote, and then the installer gets reimbursed from the utility. So that should just be deducted from the price, and you don't ever see that. Or you should see it, but you don't ever like pay that money out and then get it back. Tax credits, the way that system works is we pay it out, we get it back. So you don't get that back until you do your taxes for the next year, but you can definitely combine them both. And there's also, I did forget to mention, there's a $300 tax credit for heat pump water heaters as well.
Actually, I have a question real quick, Sarah. I probably know the answer, but multi-units, do multi-units need separate systems for an air source? Or can you use, I know a lot of older home or multi-units have like the big octopus furnace in the basement where they all draw up of that.
So that big octopus furnace has a lot of capacity. Air source heat pumps, they don't have that much capacity. So if you had probably like a 3-unit and up building, you would have to install separate systems, but that would also enable the residents to control their own temperature like very precisely. Maybe some people like it colder in the summer, maybe some people like it really hot in the winter. So that's kind of a nice feature. If you had a smaller like 2-unit, you might be able to do that with one condenser, but it really depends on the exact size and how insulated it is.
Thank you.
I just had a comment. We put a heat pump in our house in like a 3-season room that we had that never had any heat or cooling in it. And we were very impressed with how fast the room would heat up or cool down with the heat pump. So that's like another benefit of the installation that we have. So we can use that room all year round now, which is a plus.
So would you recommend, I mean, I've just hearing about the scope of this, and I didn't know anything about any of this, so it's super fascinating. So for Justin to have just one room on a heat pump, is that unusual? It sounds like it's something you'd be doing on a larger scale.
So that's actually pretty common. And if you were to, I don't think a lot of people do this, but I did this recently, is I looked at a bunch of heating installers' websites, and a lot of them do basically offer heat pumps as that solution. A lot of them use Minisplit synonymously for heat pumps for that reason, because Justin, I don't know that exact room, but you probably didn't get ductwork in. You probably just got that Minisplit in there so that you didn't have to pay for ductwork and you didn't have to like hide it anywhere.
Right. That was the trade-off, is that we wouldn't have to, add the ductwork and then also add the load of heating that room to our existing furnace and air conditioning unit. So it took like the existing out of the equation, and it just, we ran the piping and stuff like that up the side of the house and covered it with that, all that wire cover that it just, fits right in with the rest of the vinyl siding on the house. So you can't even tell that it's running through that room.
And I have a question for Justin, if you can answer. For like cooling days, is it comparison to like a air conditioner or like a fan, like a high powered fan? Like what does it compare to?
I'd equate it to like a quieter air conditioner, because the compressor is obviously outside underneath the room. And it even has like the remote. I think we have it's Mitsubishi is the brand. The remote, you can control it even if you don't want to hear you can turn the fan up real loud if you want it to cool down fast, but if you want it to be like quiet, like if you're like watching a movie or something in there, we can turn it on so it just kind of passively and a little bit slower cools the room down. But yeah, I think it's better because you don't get the loud compressor like right outside the window. It's really, it was a nice improvement to that room.
Cool, thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Hi, there was a question on the Facebook Live. Are there examples in Western New York that use air source or ground source with solar?
So there's probably individual homes, And I actually know of a couple of developers, but I probably can't say who they are, who are actually working on developing those units right now, where they're installing air source heat pumps, and then they're putting solar on the roof to really maximize the savings. The most recent building, they didn't pair it with solar, but the Pierce Aero building in Buffalo, which is an apartment complex that used to be the Pierce Aero factory, they installed all ground source heat pumps so that they could keep their operating costs very low, but be able to provide both heating and cooling. And so it's definitely becoming more popular. And then there's also the Ciano building that has heat pumps, although they don't have solar. And that's something, Push also develops affordable housing, and our future developments will have heat pumps paired with solar so that we keep the operating costs as low as possible for us as the landlord, but then we pass those savings on to the residents.
Would you say that 10 Winter Street, doesn't that have heat pumps and solar?
Oh, you're right. It does. It does have ground source heat pumps and solar. And so with ground source, one of the things that you're really paying for is the fans and the pumps to move that, to circulate the liquid in the loops and then to move the air into your home. And that one has hydronic heating. So it's pumping, it's circulating the hot water around the home. So that one, you're right, Luke. Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure I was remembering. I mean, that's, and you said it uses hydronic heating. Can you just real quick again, what is that?
Sure. So hydronic heating is heating that it heats up hot water and then it circulates hot water through your home, and that's how it stays hot. And so I have a hydronic system in my home. It's a pretty old system, although I really like how it works. And it doesn't, you don't necessarily, like when you get home, you can't like blast the heat like you can with a furnace because it's blowing that hot air on you. But as long as you set your thermostat right and let the heating system kind of just get to temperature and stay there, it's a really comfortable option, especially if you have like allergies, because it doesn't blow a bunch of air around. And then there's also steam heat, which is another way that you can use radiators to heat your home. And unfortunately, steam heat requires such high temperatures that you can't use heat pumps right now to provide steam heat. But if you have hydronic heat, that's water circulating through baseboards or radiators, it's definitely something that's an option.
I've always thought of that as being the hot water baseboard heating instead of using the word hydronic. That's fancier.
Yeah, you're right, Dick. Thank you. So I talk with a lot of installers, so it's sometimes I forget to
Absolutely.
separate both worlds.
Yeah.
So you have a new assignment now, Sarah, from our friendly watcher on Facebook. If you could discuss the 10 Winter Street location. It says financial incentives. I'm not sure. Mr. Morgan, were you thinking the cost of the project or incentives if someone was to do something similar now?
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and start to answer and you can jump in. The cost of the project, I don't have it offhand, and it's also a little tricky because that project utilized a lot of volunteer and trainee labor. And so the costs aren't really gonna equate. In terms of incentives now, so if we were to do the 10 Winter Street now, we could get the incentives for installing both the ground source heat pump system, as well as there's incentives through New York Sun for solar as well.
Perfect. He was asking about the cost and that was it. Thank you.
All right. I think this has been such a great hour. Thank you, Sarah, so much for your time and your valuable information. I know I have learned a lot, and definitely makes me want to switch when the time is right. So again, you could reach out to us at pushgreen.org. We have a survey that you could fill out that gives us a little more information about yourself, or if you want to sign up for an energy assessment, reach out to us. We could give you more information about programs, or get you connected with an assessment, and we could also give you Sarah's information if you've already got an assessment and you were looking to go with the air source heat pump or ground source heat pump, or if you want to know more about those programs. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope everyone has a great evening and a good holiday. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Sarah, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sarah,
everyone.
and
Thanks,
Laura,
Nick.
Natalie, Jason. Have a good Memorial Day.
Yes.
Bye.
As well.